The Talaxian warships blotted out the sun, their energy cannons bathing Earth in fire. It wasn't the destruction that bothered Paul Robinson, though. It was the waste. Cities dissolved into slag, skyscrapers crumbled like sandcastles, and the sky choked on a black, oily smoke that stung the eyes and coated everything in a gritty film. But Paul, standing amidst the debris-strewn streets of what was once Chicago, just scowled. "Inefficient energy disbursement," he muttered, adjusting the goggles perched on his nose. "They're just blasting everything to hell, no finesse. And look at all that recoverable material going up in flames, perfectly good polymers, rare earth elements. Gone." He shook his head, a picture of detached annoyance amidst the chaos. A complete and utter waste of potential. A week before, Earth had been a different kind of mess. Still a mess, mind you, just a more familiar one. Paul remembered tinkering in his lab, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled plastic, trying to coax a few more kilowatt hours out of a repurposed sewage treatment plant. Pollution choked the skies, landfills overflowed, and social unrest simmered just below the surface. But Paul, ever the optimist, or perhaps just stubbornly pragmatic, saw opportunity. He saw potential energy in the smog, building materials in the mountains of trash and solutions where others saw only problems. Then came the Talaxians. A booming voice, translated into a dozen languages, echoed across the ravaged planet. "People of Earth," it declared, "we have come to claim what you have squandered. Your planet's resources are depleted, your environment poisoned. Under our rule, Earth will enter a new era of efficiency. Waste will be eliminated, order will be restored." Paul scoffed, spitting a wad of something black and viscous onto the ground. "Efficiency? Those ignorant slobs are turning half the planet into a slag heap. They call that efficient. Bunch of goddamn space pirates." Ignoring the panicked crowds rushing towards underground shelters, Paul ventured towards the smoldering wreckage of a downed Talaxian war machine. Twisted metal groaned in the heat, sparks danced from severed power cables, and the air reeked of burnt ozone and alien chemicals. But Paul saw only opportunity. "Don't go near that thing, mister," a woman screamed, clutching a child to her chest. It could explode. Paul waved a dismissive hand, already pulling a heavy-duty wrench from his battered toolbox. "Relax, lady, just a bit of urban renewal." He wrestled a panel off the warship's hull, revealing a tangle of wires and humming components. "Now this," he muttered, "this is interesting." He spent the next few hours scavenging, ignoring the dangers and the pleas of the few remaining survivors. He saw value where others saw only destruction, potential where others saw only ruin. Back in his hidden workshop, a cluttered space crammed with salvaged tech, half-finished projects, and the faint scent of ozone, Paul began to formulate his plans. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with circuit boards, wires, and strange alien artifacts. A half-disassembled fusion reactor sat in one corner, next to a stack of old computer monitors displaying schematics and equations. This was his sanctuary, his playground, his laboratory. News reports flickered across a jury-rigged screen, detailing the utter ineffectiveness of Earth's defenses against the Talaxian weaponry. Conventional missiles were useless, energy shields crumbled under the alien cannons, and the human fleet had been decimated in a matter of hours. The message was clear. Humanity was vulnerable, outmatched, doomed. Paul ignored the despairing voices and focused on the chunk of Talaxian tech he'd managed to haul back to his workshop. It was an energy converter of some kind, humming with an alien power source. "Inefficient," he muttered, running a diagnostic scan. "Ridiculously inefficient, but there's potential here, significant potential." A government official appeared on the screen, his face grim. "Due to widespread damage and resource depletion," he announced, "strict rationing measures will be implemented immediately. Water, food, and energy will be allocated according to need." Paul scoffed, switching off the screen. "Rationing, with all this free energy floating around. Idiots. I could power the whole damn city with what these morons are just throwing away. He set to work, modifying the Talaxian converter, stripping away unnecessary components and rerouting the energy flow. His goal: to create a device that could convert atmospheric pollutants into usable energy, a way to turn the Talaxians' destruction into Earth's salvation. The work was slow, painstaking, and fraught with challenges. The Talaxian technology was complex, alien, and often unpredictable. Circuits overloaded, wires melted, and strange sparks flew across the room. But Paul persevered, driven by a stubborn purpose and a deep-seated belief in his own abilities. Finally, after days of relentless work, he had it. A crude, jury-rigged device cobbled together from scavenged parts and alien technology. He flipped a switch and the machine sputtered to life, humming with a strange, uneven rhythm. A faint blue glow emanated from its core and the air crackled with static electricity. The device worked. It was crude, dangerous, and emitted strange pulses that made his teeth ache, but it worked. He had power. The prototype sputtered, coughing out a shower of sparks. A high-pitched whine escalated into a crackling crescendo before a small explosion blew the access panel off, sending it skittering across the cluttered workshop floor. The smell of ozone hung thick in the air, stinging Paul Robinson's nostrils. He sighed, pushing a greasy strand of hair from his eyes. Well, that's just great. Kilometers above, in the oppressive green glow of her Talaxian patrol craft, Arya adjusted her headset. Her mission: monitor human energy consumption in Sector 7, specifically around grid coordinate designated HR 884, Paul Robinson's sector. Her superiors suspected unauthorized power usage. Arya, fresh out of the academy, saw it as a boring but necessary duty, a testament to the Empire's unwavering commitment to resource efficiency. Humans, after all, were notoriously wasteful. Suddenly, a jarring alarm blared through the cockpit. Drone malfunction, navigational systems compromised. The small, automated drone trailing her patrol craft had gone haywire, its thrusters firing erratically. Arya fought for control, but the drone, now a rogue projectile, slammed into her ship, sending it spiraling towards the surface. Red lights flashed and the artificial gravity flickered. Mayday, mayday, patrol craft TX-42 going down near HR 884. The comms went dead. The crash was violent. Metal screamed against metal as the Talaxian craft tore through the atmosphere, impacting hard in a field just beyond Paul's workshop. The cockpit was a twisted mess. Arya groaned, struggling to free herself from the wreckage. A shard of plasteel had pierced her flight suit, just above her left thigh. Pain lanced through her leg. She was losing blood fast. Inside the workshop, Paul registered the distant rumble of the crash. He frowned, grabbing his battered plasma cutter. Probably just another Talaxian piece of junk falling out of the sky. He'd learned to ignore most of it. Still, salvage was salvage. He cautiously approached the crash site, plasma cutter in hand, ready to strip anything of value. But as he neared the wreckage, he saw her, a young Talaxian pilot, slumped in the cockpit, her face pale with pain. His first instinct was to turn away. Let the Empire deal with its own mess. But something in her wide, terrified eyes stopped him. Ignoring every regulation, every instinct for self-preservation, Paul activated the plasma cutter, carefully slicing through the mangled plasteel to reach her. "Hold still," he grunted, pulling her free from the wreckage. The gash in her flight suit was worse than he thought. He had to stop the bleeding, and fast. Back in his workshop, he quickly modified his unstable energy converter, rerouting the power flow to create a makeshift cauterizer. It was crude, dangerous, and probably violated a dozen Talaxian medical protocols, but it was all he had. He pressed the modified converter against the wound. Arya gasped, her body arching in pain. The air filled with the smell of burning flesh. But the bleeding stopped. Arya stared at him, her large, multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Why did you do that? Her voice was weak, raspy. Paul shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Waste of perfectly good blood. Besides, I needed the practice. Meanwhile, the Talaxian enforcers were on high alert. Reports of increased energy readings and a downed patrol craft had them swarming the sector. Their armored vehicles rumbled through the streets. Their energy rifles pointed menacingly at the human population. Any suspected infraction, any hint of resistance, was met with swift and brutal force. These humans are like vermin, one enforcer snarled, kicking over a stack of salvaged metal. Hoarding resources while our homeworlds suffer. Back in the workshop, Paul was bandaging Arya's leg with scavenged cloth. You know, he said, his voice permeated with cynicism, this whole occupation is a massive missed opportunity. You guys are so busy blowing things up and sucking the planet dry, you're not even bothering to recycle properly. Arya frowned. We are here to ensure efficient resource allocation. A sudden commotion outside interrupted them. Arya peered through a crack in the wall. The Talaxian enforcers were confiscating food and water from a small group of humans, leaving them empty-handed and terrified. A knot formed in Arya's stomach. Paul saw her reaction. Your homeworlds are facing resource shortages too, right? Funny how that works. You come here preaching efficiency, but you're just making the same mistakes you made back home. He gestured to a series of interconnected tubes and filters. Watch this. He poured a container of viscous, toxic sludge into one end. The machine whirred and sputtered, and moments later, clear, potable water trickled out the other end. Arya stared in amazement. You can purify toxic waste. Just then, Arya's wrist comm crackled to life. It was Commander Ferengi. Pilot Arya, report immediately on human activity in your sector. Special focus on energy readings emanating from HR 884. Ferengi's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. Paul watched Arya's face, sensing the shift in her demeanor. He knew what she had to do. Later that evening, Paul found Arya hunched over her damaged comm unit, her fingers flying across the control panel. He approached cautiously, sending a message. Yes, her voice was flat, telling them about my little experiments. Arya didn't meet his gaze. I have to, Paul sighed. Of course you do. He turned to leave. Wait. Arya turned back, her expression troubled. The energy pulses. From your converter, what are they? Masking agents. Your sensors are picking up my prototype, but they're missing the real energy hogs. Your own extraction rigs are leaking power like sieves. I'm surprised you didn't notice. Arya's eyes widened. Reporting Paul would not only doom him, but it would also reveal her own incompetence, her failure to detect the true sources of energy waste. She thought of her family, of her duty, of everything she believed in. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the transmit button. The faces of the humans she had seen that day flashed through her mind. Their fear, their desperation. Then she thought of Paul risking his life to save her. Taking a deep breath, she transmitted the report, but it was heavily edited, omitting key details about Paul's prototype and its true potential. She focused on the initial power surge, downplaying the converter's efficiency and masking capabilities. That night, Arya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The Talaxian justification for the invasion resource efficiency, planetary salvation felt hollow, a lie perpetuated by those in power. The next morning, the comm unit beeped. It was Commander Ferengi. Pilot Arya, you are to remain with the human, Robinson, and continue monitoring his activity. Your family's well-being depends on your compliance. The message ended with a chilling silence. They'll be watching, Arya hissed, her voice barely audible above the hum of the converter. The faint blue glow of its energy shield cast long shadows across her worried face. My report. It wasn't entirely accurate. I lowered the output readings, made it seem less significant. Paul, tinkering with a panel on the converter, didn't look up. Significant. It's keeping half the city from freezing in the dark. People are relying on this, Arya. Can't just shut it down. He tightened a screw with a practiced twist. Besides, I've got an idea, a risky one, mind you. He straightened, wiping grease on his already stained overalls. Instead of shutting it down, we're going to crank it up. Not the energy output, the signal. We're going to overload their damn sensors. Working with practiced efficiency, Paul reconfigured several internal components. Wires sparked as he rerouted power, the air thick with the smell of ozone. Within an hour, the converter's familiar hum shifted to a high-pitched whine. Now, Paul said, stepping back. Let's see if this works. He activated the modified emitter. A concentrated burst of energy, invisible to the naked eye, pulsed outwards. The converter's energy signature, normally a beacon for Talaxian sensors, fractured into 1,000 false echoes, creating a localized electromagnetic interference field. Unbeknownst to them, the burst had a wider reach than intended. Miles away, within the Talaxian command center, communication screens flickered and died. Frustrated officers barked orders as their carefully orchestrated network sputtered and crashed. A Talaxian patrol, its hovercraft skimming above the rubble-strewn streets, received garbled instructions. Their mission: investigate the source of the communication disruption. They rounded a corner and were met with a hail of plasma fire. Human rebels, desperate for supplies, had been waiting in ambush, hoping to scavenge weapons and energy cells. Paul and Arya found themselves caught in the crossfire. Plasma bolts sizzled past them, impacting the crumbling walls of the building. The air filled with the acrid smell of burnt concrete and the desperate cries of the wounded. Down! Paul yelled, shoving Arya behind a stack of salvaged metal. He grabbed a discarded plasma rifle, its energy cell half depleted. The rebels were disorganized, poorly equipped, but utterly fearless. The Talaxians, caught off guard, returned fire with brutal efficiency. Arya, despite her initial shock, moved with a surprising grace. She darted between cover, her lithe form a blur against the backdrop of destruction. A rebel, crazed with desperation, raised a makeshift grenade launcher, aiming it directly at Paul. Before Paul could react, Arya lunged forward, striking the rebel's arm with a precise blow. The launcher clattered to the ground, the grenade harmlessly detonating against a pile of rubble. Paul stared at Arya, his eyes narrowed. He saw the flicker of regret in her expression, the internal struggle between her training and her conscience. A new layer of trust began to form, fragile but undeniable. "The disruption," Arya said, panting, as the sounds of battle faded slightly. "It's more widespread than we thought. The Talaxian response will be significant. This could have long-term consequences." Later that day, poring over salvaged data chips, Paul stumbled upon something unexpected. Schematics of vast underground facilities sprawling beneath the city, filled with stolen resources. These facilities weren't included in the data Arya had provided. "What is this?" Paul asked, pointing at the schematics. Arya frowned, studying the diagrams. "I don't know, I wasn't aware of these." She hesitated, "But there's something else, a project. They called it Project Chimera. It was top secret. All I know is that it's dangerous and involves extracting a special element." Paul's eyes widened. Chimera, and these resource facilities. It's all connected. This has to be related to the superweapon. Meanwhile, in the Talaxian command center, the communication network had been partially restored. Commander Varkos, a hulking figure with eyes as cold as vacuum, addressed a subordinate. "The disruption originated near Sector Gamma. Send Interrogator Rixus and his team. I want answers, and I want them now." Interrogator Rixus was known for his ruthless efficiency. His methods were persuasive. Paul knew they were running out of time. "We need to get into those facilities," he said, his voice grim. "Find out what they're really up to." "It's heavily guarded," Arya replied, her voice imbued with concern. "Then we create a diversion," Paul said, a glint in his eye. "A big one." He began adjusting the converter's settings once more, his fingers flying across the controls. Time to draw Rixus and his goons away from the entrance. As Rixus's transport descended near the converter's location, Paul unleashed another energy burst, far more potent than the first. Alarms blared across the city as Talaxian sensors went haywire. While Rixus and his team investigated the source of the interference, Arya led Paul through the labyrinthine streets towards the entrance of the underground facility. Her knowledge of Talaxian security protocols proved invaluable. She bypassed checkpoints, deactivated surveillance cameras, and navigated the maze of corridors with ease. Inside, the scale of the operation was staggering. Vast caverns, lit by harsh artificial light, revealed row upon row of storage containers filled with everything from precious metals to rare minerals. But it was what was happening deeper within the facility that truly horrified them. Massive drills were boring into the Earth's core, extracting a viscous, iridescent liquid that pulsed with an unnatural energy. "They're bleeding the planet dry," Paul whispered, his voice filled with disgust. "This is insane." "They're using it to power the weapon," Arya confirmed, her face pale. "The one that can render entire planets uninhabitable." Suddenly, Arya stopped, her hand hovering over a control panel. She entered a series of commands, her fingers moving with practiced speed. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a data chip. "It's from my brother," she said, her voice trembling. "He's working on Project Chimera, he says. He says it's a mistake, that the weapon is unstable, that the consequences could be catastrophic." A sudden alarm blared through the facility. "They're onto us," Arya exclaimed. "We have to go." They raced back through the corridors, the sound of approaching footsteps echoing behind them. Rixus and his team osing in. They reached the entrance just as the interrogator rounded the corner, his eyes burning with cold fury. Arya fired a burst from her plasma rifle, creating a momentary distraction. They sprinted through the streets, dodging plasma fire, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding. They escaped barely, with newfound knowledge and a chilling understanding of the stakes. The Talaxians weren't just taking resources. They were systematically dismantling the planet, preparing to unleash a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The data streamed across the holographic displays, a torrent of Talaxian script and complex schematics. Paul leaned closer, his eyes scanning the intricate network of lines and symbols. "This mineral extraction process, it's far more extensive than we initially thought." Arya's fingers danced across the control panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. "My brother mentioned Project Chimera in his message, but the connection to the superweapon wasn't clear. Now," she paused, highlighting a specific sequence of code. "This section is heavily encrypted. It looks like he tried to hide something." After a moment of intense focus, Arya gasped. "I've got it." He used a variation of the Talaxian military cipher. "It's a hidden research lab located beneath the northern sector. That's where Project Chimera is being developed." She continued to scroll through the data. "Wait, there's more. A warning. He says there's a critical vulnerability in the mineral extraction process. Something about a cascading failure. A chain reaction that could." Her voice trailed off, her eyes widening in alarm. "He says it could destabilize the planet's core." Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. A synthesized voice echoed from the speakers. "Intruder alert. Sector Gamma 7 under lockdown. All personnel report to designated security checkpoints." Paul cursed under his breath. "They know we're here." Arya's face was pale. "The ecological damage. It's accelerating. My brother was right. The more they extract, the faster the planet deteriorates." She pointed to a graph on the screen. "Look at the fluctuations in the magnetic field. At this rate, Earth's defenses won't last." "We need to contact your brother," Paul said, his voice urgent. "Tell him what we found." Arya nodded. "There's a hidden Talaxian communication relay station not far from here. I know the location. It's our best chance to send a message off-world." Paul glanced at the converter, its surface still glowing faintly from the energy surge. I might be able to modify this thing, turn it into a jamming device, disrupt their surveillance network, give us some breathing room. Within minutes, Paul had reconfigured the converter, rerouting its energy output. He held it up, its casing humming with power. Let's see if this works. He activated the device. The air crackled with energy. They stepped out of the underground facility into the deserted streets. The city was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of Talaxian occupation replaced by an unsettling silence. As they moved through the shadows, a group of figures emerged from an alleyway. They were human, clad in scavenged armor and wielding makeshift weapons. "We know who you are," a gruff voice said. "We've been watching you." "Resistance fighters," Arya whispered. "We can help you," the leader said. "We know the tunnels, we can get you out of the city." Paul eyed them with suspicion. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We want the Talaxians gone," the leader replied. "Just like you, we have information resources, we can help each other." Arya stepped forward. "They're telling the truth, Paul. They know the city. They know the tunnels. We need their help." Paul hesitated, then nodded. "All right, lead the way." The resistance fighters guided them through a maze of underground tunnels, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Talaxian patrols were frequent, but Paul's jamming device seemed to be working, disrupting their sensors and allowing them to evade detection. Suddenly, the leader of the resistance fighters stopped, his hand raised. "Wait, something's not right." As if on cue, a section of the tunnel collapsed, blocking their path. Talaxian soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on Paul and Arya. "You've been betrayed," Arya hissed. The leader of the resistance fighters smirked. "The interrogator offered us a deal, information for freedom." Paul pushed Arya behind him. "Run, get to the relay station." Arya hesitated, then sprinted down a side passage, the resistance fighters hot on her heels. Paul engaged the Talaxian soldiers, his movements fast and efficient. He knew he couldn't hold them off for long. He had to trust that Arya could reach the relay station. Arya burst out of the tunnel into a deserted plaza. In the center stood the communication relay station, a towering structure of metal and glass, but it was heavily guarded. Talaxian soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their weapons scanning the area. She needed a plan, and fast. Paul's voice echoed in her mind. "Adapt, improvise, overcome." Then she saw it, a captured Talaxian transport vehicle parked nearby. It was their only chance. "Paul." She said, "Ed, I'm going in, I need a distraction." Paul, still engaged with the Talaxian soldiers, grinned grimly. "On it." Arya hot-wired the transport vehicle and sped towards the checkpoint, the vehicle's engine roaring. She donned a discarded Talaxian uniform, hoping it would be enough to fool the guards. "Halt!" a Talaxian officer shouted, stepping in front of the vehicle. "Identification." Arya swallowed hard, activating the transport's comm system. "This is Commander Lyra of the 7th Battalion. I have urgent orders from the interrogator." She hoped her knowledge of Talaxian military protocols would be enough to convince him. The officer scrutinized her, his eyes narrowed. "Your credentials don't match our database. Flag this vehicle for inspection." Arya's heart pounded in her chest. They were about to be discovered. Suddenly, the city plunged into darkness. The lights flickered and died, plunging the checkpoint into chaos. "What's happening?" the officer shouted. Paul's voice crackled over Arya's comm. "That's your cue. Go." Arya floored the accelerator, the transport vehicle smashing through the checkpoint barriers. The Talaxian soldiers opened fire, but it was too late. She was inside the relay station. She raced through the corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the main control room, her eyes widening in horror. The interrogator stood there, a squad of elite Talaxian soldiers flanking him. He smiled, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Welcome, Arya," he said. "I've been expecting you." Arya ignored him, her fingers flying across the control panel. She needed to send the message. "Now." "Brother," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "The mineral extraction process. It's unstable, the vulnerability. It's in the core regulator. You have to shut it down." Before she could say more, the interrogator lunged forward, grabbing her arm. He thumped his hand on the control panel, cutting off the transmission. "You've made a grave mistake, Arya," he said, his voice cold. "You've betrayed your people." He gestured to the soldiers. "Take her away." Arya struggled, but it was no use. The soldiers dragged her away, her eyes filled with despair. The interrogator turned to the security camera, his gaze fixed on the city outside. "Where is he?" In the shadows, Paul watched as Arya was taken away. His face was grim, his eyes filled with perseverance. He knew what he had to do. He would rescue Arya. He would stop Project Chimera. He would make the Talaxians pay. The clock was ticking. The echo of the blast still rang in Paul's ears as he stumbled through the ruined cityscape, clutching the data chip containing Arya's message. He found a relatively intact doorway, wedged himself inside, and sealed the opening with scavenged plasteel sheeting. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ionized metal and burning polymers. He coughed, spitting out a mouthful of metallic-tasting grit. He jacked the data chip into his wrist-mounted interface. Arya's face flickered onto the small screen, fragmented and distorted by static, her voice a ghost in the ruined world. Project Chimera. Mining site. Coordinates. The image broke up completely. He swore under his breath, running the sequence again, isolating the clearest fragments. Coordinates swam into focus. 34. 7N, 118. 2W then, a string of alphanumeric characters, likely a key to decrypt the full message. He cross-referenced the coordinates with the pre-invasion map stored in his neural net. A remote mining site, nestled in the desolate expanse of what was once the Mojave Desert, far beyond the city's perimeter, heavily fortified according to the outdated schematics. Paul needed boots on the ground, local knowledge he didn't possess. He hated the idea, but he had no choice. He had to find the resistance. He knew their methods were brutal, their ideology often simplistic, but they knew this land. It took him hours, navigating through the skeletal remains of buildings, dodging Talaxian patrol drones, to reach their designated rendezvous point, a collapsed subway station. The air hung thick with the stench of decay and desperation. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman with hardened eyes and a weapon cobbled together from scrap metal. "You're the engineer, the one they call recycler." Her voice was gravelly, devoid of warmth. "I need information," Paul said, cutting to the chase. "The mining site at 34, 7 North, 118 2 West, Project Chimera." The woman's expression hardened. "That's a death trap." "The mining site's just a cover. It's a secret research facility churning out something nasty, something that makes the surface uninhabitable." She spat on the ground. "But it's guarded like a queen's nest, and the environmental controls failed years ago. The place is swimming in toxins. You won't last an hour without protection." "We hit them head-on," a younger man interjected, brandishing a crude energy rifle. "Overwhelm them with numbers, they won't expect it." Paul shook his head. "A direct assault is suicide. We need to be surgical, stealth infiltration, exploit their weaknesses." "And what weaknesses are those, recycler?" The woman sneered. "Besides your own naivete." Elsewhere in a sterile, harshly lit room, Arya hung suspended by magnetic restraints. Her face was bruised, her Talaxian blue skin marred with angry red welts. The interrogator, a hulking Talaxian with eyes as cold as vacuum, loomed over her. "Tell me what he plans. Where is he going?" The interrogator's voice was a low, guttural growl. Arya bit back a scream. She had revealed nothing of substance, feeding him carefully constructed lies, leading him down blind alleys. She would not betray Paul. Back at the subway station, Paul traced a finger across a holographic map projected from his wrist device. "The mining operation itself is the key. The environmental damage. We use it as cover. Infiltration through the toxic zones. They won't expect an attack from there." The resistance fighters exchanged skeptical glances. The leader, the hardened woman, finally spoke. "We have filtration suits, scavenged from old hazmat teams, but they're jury-rigged, limited protection, maybe an hour tops in the worst zones. It's enough, Paul insisted. We move fast, we hit hard. The resistance fighters led him through a labyrinthine network of tunnels, a forgotten service route that snaked beneath the mining site. The air grew thick, acrid, burning in his lungs even through the filtration mask. The tunnel walls were unstable, groaning under the weight of the earth above. Dust and debris rained down constantly. "This passage is collapsing," Paul observed, his voice muffled by the mask. "We need to reinforce it or we'll be buried alive." He began stripping plasteel supports from the tunnel walls, jury-rigging them into a makeshift framework to stabilize the collapsing sections. Sparks flew as he welded the supports together, the rhythmic clang of metal echoing through the claustrophobic space. "Hurry," the resistance leader urged. "That noise will attract attention." Too late. A burst of energy fire ripped through the tunnel entrance, narrowly missing Paul. "Talaxian patrol," someone shouted. As the resistance fighters engaged the patrol, Arya in the interrogation room feigned compliance. "He's heading south, towards the old power station," she stammered, deliberately misdirecting the interrogator. While he was distracted, she subtly manipulated the control panel of her restraints, rerouting power, overloading the communication system. A small act of defiance, but it bought them time. Deeper in the tunnels, Paul and the remaining resistance fighters pressed on. They rounded a corner and stumbled upon a group of Talaxian miners, huddled together, coughing and gasping for breath. Their skin was blistered and raw, their eyes bloodshot. "They're suffering from the toxins," one of the resistance fighters said, his voice filled with disgust. "Leave them, they're the enemy." Paul hesitated. He saw the pain in their eyes, the desperation for relief. "We can't just leave them to die," he said, his voice firm. "We have to help them." "Are you crazy?" the resistance leader hissed. "They're Talaxians, they're the ones who did this to us." "They're dying," Paul countered. "We waste precious time." The moment stretched between them, a taut wire of conflicting ideologies. The right thing versus the expedient thing. "Help them," Paul said to the resistance fighter closest to him. "Get them out of here." With a reluctant grunt, the resistance fighters began assisting the stricken miners, guiding them back towards the entrance. The delay was costly, but Paul knew it was the right thing to do. He'd seen too much waste already. In the interrogation room, sparks flew from the damaged communication panel. The interrogator whirled around, his eyes narrowing. What have you done?" He lunged for Arya, but she was ready. She kicked out, catching him off balance, then slammed her head against the magnetic restraints, knocking herself unconscious. Better unconscious than broken. The resistance leader stopped Paul, her face grim. "We need to talk," she said, pulling him aside. "I didn't tell you everything about Project Chimera. It's not just a research facility, it's a weapon that could sterilize the entire planet. We can't let that happen at any expense." "What are you saying?" Paul asked, a knot forming in his stomach. "If necessary, we destroy the facility, even if it means sacrificing her." Her gaze flickered towards the direction Arya would be. Paul stared at her, his expression hardening. "You're willing to kill her to destroy the weapon." "It's a necessary sacrifice," she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "The survival of humanity depends on it." "No," Paul said, his voice low and dangerous. "It depends on us being better than them." They reached the main complex. The complex hummed with barely restrained power, the air itself vibrating with nearly unleashed energy. Red lights flashed, illuminating the grim faces of the resistance fighters. "Too late," the resistance leader said, her voice tight with frustration. "He's activated the security lockdown." Suddenly, a small maintenance panel near the entrance hissed open. A data chip tumbled out, attached to a thin wire. "Arya." Paul grabbed the chip, plugging it into his wrist device. A coded message appeared on the screen, along with a single, desperate plea: "Find the bypass. Level 3, Sector 7. I believe in you." Then a second message: "Remember what you said about waste." It's all powered by unstable isotopes if they destabilize. Paul looked up at the massive structure, his mind racing. Project Chimera, powered by unstable isotopes, a weapon capable of sterilizing a planet, and now locked down, guarded by the Talaxians and potentially rigged to blow. He glanced at the resistance fighters, their faces grim, their weapons raised. He knew what he had to do. "I'm going in alone," he said. The resistance leader stepped forward, blocking his path. "You can't, it's too dangerous." "I have to," Paul replied, his voice resolute. "They're not just building a weapon, they're sitting on a bomb." He pushed past her towards the locked entrance. He was betrayed, outgunned, and facing impossible odds, but he had a plan, and he had a reason to get really nasty. The full message from Arya flooded Paul's comm implant, stark and precise. Project Chimera, planetary sterilization weapon, powered by element 7X, found only on Earth. The element's inherent instability is the weapon's weakness and its greatest danger. The core is reaching critical failure. He didn't need a second telling. "Damn it," he muttered, already rerouting power from his exosuit to boost his speed. The research facility's power source was on the verge of collapse. If it failed, Project Chimera would trigger, sterilizing Earth regardless. But Arya had also given him something more, a weapon. "Okay, new plan," he said, his voice tight with unshakable focus. "We're not just saving Earth. We're unleashing hell on the Talaxian homeworld, turning their doomsday weapon into their own demise." Paul moved with a newfound urgency, overriding security protocols with the codes Arya had provided. Automated turrets swiveled, targeting him, but he anticipated their movements, disabling them with precisely aimed shots from his scavenged Talaxian energy pistol. Arya's message was his guide, a digital ghost whispering secrets through the facility's veins. He reached the power core chamber. Alarms blared, a cacophony of klaxons and flashing red lights. The air crackled with static electricity. The core itself, a swirling vortex of emerald energy, visibly fluctuated, threatening to tear itself apart. "That's not good," Paul muttered, feeling the heat radiating off the containment field. Then he saw it, a small, almost imperceptible modification to the targeting system. Arya, before her capture, had reconfigured Project Chimera to target the Talaxian homeworld, but it required manual activation, a failsafe only accessible from the planet itself. The little minx. Paul tapped into a comm frequency, patching together a signal using scavenged Talaxian components. "This is Robinson," he transmitted, his voice tinged with static. "Project Chimera is about to go live, pointed at your oppressors. I need a diversion. Now, this is your chance." He paused, waiting. Then a chorus of acknowledgments flooded his comms. The miners feigned insistence they were all in. Outside, chaos erupted. Talaxian patrols were ambushed, supply lines disrupted. The resistance fighters, emboldened by Paul's earlier actions and now seeing his true plan, drew the Talaxian forces away from the facility, creating a window of opportunity. Paul ignored the sounds of battle, focusing on the task at hand. He accessed the core's control panel, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. He bypassed safeties, rerouted power, pushing the core past its breaking point. "Time to get nasty," he murmured. He manually overloaded the system, initiating Project Chimera's launch sequence. The facility groaned, metal twisting and groaning under the strain. The lights flickered and died. He didn't wait to see the results. He sprinted out of the chamber, the facility collapsing around him. He burst through the main doors, reuniting with Arya and the remaining resistance fighters outside the perimeter. The ground trembled. A blinding flash erupted from the facility, followed by a shockwave that knocked them off their feet. Project Chimera was launched. But instead of arcing harmlessly into space, the weapon detonated prematurely, its unstable core destabilizing the Talaxian sun. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Talaxian homeworld star pulsed, swelled, and then erupted in a supernova of unimaginable scale. The Talaxian fleet, caught in the blast radius, was vaporized. Their empire, built on conquest and oppression, was extinguished in a single, blinding moment. Arya stepped forward, her face etched with a mixture of awe and horror. She removed her Talaxian insignia, crushing it beneath her boot. "I renounce my allegiance to the Talaxian Empire," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "I vow to help humanity rebuild, to use my knowledge to prevent future conflicts." Paul looked at Arya, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Finally," he said, the quiet part coming out loud, "a reason to get really nasty." They shared a smile, a silent understanding passing between them. In the days that followed, humanity, with Arya's help, began to rebuild. Talaxian technology was repurposed for peaceful means. Energy generators, water purification systems, even advanced medical devices. The scars of the invasion remained, but a new sense of hope had taken root. Paul was placed in charge of Earth's new planetary defense system, a network of repurposed Talaxian weaponry and human ingenuity. He stood beside Arya, gazing out at the recovering landscape. He turned to Arya.